Great. Welcome everyone out there in the audience. Hopefully next year we'll be seeing you in person, but today wanted to kick off this panel at Digital Hollywood that, is very much focused on the video world, specifically monetizing the TV streaming and programming platforms. We have some wonderful panelists here that are highly experienced in these areas. In not only what we saw in the last year or two, but more importantly, I think where we see the industry going. And so I'll kick it off here with a little bit of market, and then we'll go into the introductions of each of the panelists so you have some context, and then we'll jump right into it. So, wow, what a wacky year last year, right? I think that's the only word for it, especially in this topic of video monetization, right? I think you had, for the first time in a long time, some really interesting viewerships. Not only were, there more TV viewing because people are inside a lot more, which is healthy, I think, for the overall industry and what we saw in terms of ad spend there, in terms of monetization and subscription increase, and wow, Netflix, go there on the public stock, right? But also I think an element of shift in maybe content viewership a little bit. Obviously, a lot of those great sports are the Olympic sports and Olympics, and David here will have some great comments on this. I think people had to shift a little bit what they normally watch, a little bit more towards probably binge watching, searching out content or documentaries or financial news that they might not have normally had time for. We'll see where that kind of settles out post-COVID, but definitely some interesting trends there. And then, as we all suspect, there's definitely a little bit more discussion around cord cutting, movement towards some, VOD streaming services. Obviously, that Apple TV icon list, on the app list, is getting bigger by the day. All good things, I think, for the industry, but certainly has caused some changes. And we're going to talk a little bit about that shortly. What's interesting, I think, from, two things, I think from the public markets, if you guys have looked at any of the, key names in the industry around, the video area, obviously Trade Desk handles a lot of video through the roof on stock. Companies, in the video management side, I think they went up 30% in value just in November and December. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that, I think the investor community is starting to realize that, video spending is going to be strong, and not only in linear going up, which is a bit of a shock, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but also in the fact that digital video is just, going through the roof. So I think some of those components is really now making a much more healthy public market for video monetization, and also on new streaming services coming out. Curiosity Stream was brought out public in October, and so I think you're seeing also some of these other new forms of video really sort of start to take hold in 2020. So in terms of budgets, it's interesting. The IAB just came out with, I think they do this, every year, but it's free online. Go to iab.com. Their 2021 Outlook report, and it talks about all ad spend. But in particular, there's a couple pages around video breakout. But what's interesting here is, out of close to a 400 billion sort of ad spend market, you're still seeing about 30% of that just for video. Linear is probably, forecasted to be around 15%. And this is coming from what people have provided them input on where they see spending their ad dollars. But, about 15% of that is linear, 60 billion, I think in 2020, and forecasted to go up over the next 3 years. So it's not, it's not declining it right now. So I think that was an interesting point, at least, from some of the initial forecasts you're seeing. Also, you have about, slightly lower, about 13% portion towards digital video ad spend. I don't think that's a shock, just given, again, some of the things we've seen on some of the digital video activity that's going on in 2020. So combine that, you have close to about 110, 120 billion market spend going through the system here and forecasted to go up, which is huge. The other components, which, isn't going to be a shock. Social is around 16% of total ad spend. Search is still pretty healthy, 16%, display around 14%. And then, you go down from there in some of the more traditional media areas. So you have a situation where the overall spend in ad spend is going up, and then, video is still claiming a good chunk of that. So, I will also say that you've had an interesting thing, and we have Emily here and some other panelists can speak to a bit to the globalization. Barriers are coming down in viewership and access to content. Never before have you had access to as much coming from maybe European or Asian program. Even Netflix, you'll see, is doing some really interesting stuff about bringing, outside US centric content into the living room. So I think that will also be a topic a bit we'll talk about today. The final point I'll say is addressable TV. We'll cover this a little bit. It's a little bit outside of just connected TV or OTT in the addressable market. And that's speaking to, companies and different groups that are helping target linear TV addressability in a much more sophisticated way, which you're starting to see. That I think it's the first time they really start to track that, quote, addressable TV market separately. You certainly heard a lot about CTV and OTT, and that's targeted to be about 3 billion, growing to 10 billion over the next couple of years. And so, you have some I think really interesting new budgets that are developing here. So with that, I'll hand it off to the panelists here. Maybe Saul, why don't I have you jump in here, give a little bit of background, obviously from IBM. The weather data you guys see, there's some really interesting trends, but we'll get into that a little bit. But, I'd love to hear a bit more about your background for the group.
Sure, happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Glad to be here virtually if we can't be here in person this year. I'm Saul Berman. I'm the Chief Strategist for part of our practice at Global Business Services at IBM. I've been following this industry for many years, and I'm the author of Not for Free and the End of Television as We Know It, some of which we can talk about really happened this year, and happy to be with you today.
Great. Thank you, Saul. Mary, you want to jump in?
Sure. Mary Hamilton, also excited to be here, even if by virtual. I lead our technology innovation for North America for Accenture. So what that looks like is really helping to incubate and bring forward the latest technologies through our R&D, research and development, through open innovation, through incubating that technology and doing rapid prototypes with our clients. And I've probably spent the last 10 years or so working with various media and entertainment clients.
Great, thank you. Kevin, you want to jump in?
Sure. My name is Kevin Mckearn. I work with Vivo, which is a joint venture of Universal Music Group and Sony Music Entertainment, and we are the keepers of all the premium music videos in the world. And we run a network of distribution that has an AVOD support and drives monetization of artist music videos. And again, one of those companies that is actually borderless. We operate globally. So it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, we'll get a lot into the AVOD shortly, which will be great. And Emily, you want to chime in?
Sure. Hi, this is Emily Powers. I'm head of BritBox North America. And for those of you who don't know BritBox, it is the largest collection of British content available in North America. We're an SVOD service. We launched only a few years ago, and we've been one of the fastest growing targeted services. We just surpassed 1.5 million, which we're very excited about.
Great, great. And David?
Sure. Hi, my name is David Borstein. I'm the SVP of Sales for Fox Digital. My purview covers the Fox Entertainment and Fox Sports digital platforms, which include our owned and operated apps, Fox on Hulu, our Thursday Night Football streaming platform, as well as our newly partner Tubi, which joined the Fox family this past April.
Great, thank you. And Bob?
Yeah, hi, I'm Bob Rodriguez. I'm CEO of NatCom, which is a holding company that specializes in short form content in the production and distribution. It's a former NBC company, and our specialty really is threefold. We create a lot of content. We distribute that to about 1,000 platforms throughout the hemisphere with a very special focus on Latin America, and we monetize it through our own ad network.
Great, thanks. And just for everyone, from my background, I'm in investment banking at Stifel and focus on MarTech and media there. So this is definitely a apropos topic. And before that, I actually did corporate development at NBC. So I have a love of video. So with that, let's jump into it a bit more. I think, I think we'll just kind of hit the first one right on target here. Obviously the COVID topic, I think it's on everyone's mind in so many different ways, but I think, again, what I mentioned before and specifically how it's affecting video and viewership is just really fascinating. And so I'm gonna throw out to the group here, what effects we've seen on COVID in terms of, what we think of viewership and ad spend or even subscription, dollars moving up there. And, obviously there's, some shift from linear streaming, but, overall, just a very positive experience for the industry. So, Mary, I think you guys obviously have some good insights from your perspective. Love to have you jump in here, and then maybe Saul and David can take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, COVID has had a pretty significant impact on things. I think one of the perspectives that we share is that there was already a digital divide shaping up, and COVID has really just accelerated that. We've gone from months, would have taken years to periods of months. And I think some of that is allowing companies that already had some of that infrastructure and already had some of that technology, like cloud, like AI, to pivot more quickly, right, and to make that shift. But then, we're seeing some really interesting business model shifts as well. We talk a little bit about globalization, but things like live stream shopping in China, right, is a $200 billion business, right, and it's just taking off. And so what does that look like, right? And how do we start to see things that look maybe more like Twitch than, Netflix, right? And, a shift in the kinds of content. And I think what COVID has done is it's opened up the possibilities of new business models, right? It's allowed for different kinds of creativity that perhaps, in the old model with traditional revenue streams, the revenue streams were there, right? And change wasn't forced. When those revenue streams are more disrupted, right, then it brings in the opportunity to kind of relook at things and be more creative. And I think that's where we're starting to see some of the shifts around, the difference between what we're seeing in linear TV and now streaming services. So I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think it's really, and also it speaks to that globalization point we just talked about, where you have such a community now with broadband, 5G, people watching stuff video on their phone as much as, ever before, and having that not only entertainment experience, but, we'll get this in a little bit, like connecting it to that commerce experience, right? How to drive product and purchase through a whole different way. Saul, how about you, in terms of, maybe what you've seen from your business in terms of the COVID angle?
And very, very interesting, because a lot of the trends that have been out there for a lot of years in a lot of industries have really accelerated and really happened this year. So a lot of the things we talked about, like, cord cutting, about new business models, about direct to theater becoming direct to video streaming distribution, really happened this year. Things that people said would take a long time, things that people said wouldn't happen in a short period of time, but whether it be healthcare or whether it be retail, whether it be, when and how you see your doctor, the same thing happened in the video industry this year because of COVID. We began to see new opportunities, new business models. We began to see the shift. We began to see people get serious and real and believe in it. We began to see the shift to watching online what you would have watched in person or on linear TV traditionally. And there were a lot more alternatives as to how you did that. There are a lot of players in the field, as we'll talk about, maybe weren't there a year or two ago, became serious players. And you can do that, as somebody said, on a global basis wherever you are. So if you will, everything got stirred up, everything got mixed up. There's some winners and losers in this. A lot of the advertising went online. People like mobile saw the advertising decrease. People like some of the linear TV saw it decrease. But clearly, overall, the pie is representing a bigger opportunity, I think, for everyone as these new channels come on board. And streaming is really our life right now.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely, it's not just a millennial thing right now, right? Obviously, there's a whole population and demographic that's gotten a lot more comfortable with how to navigate that TV, and that's navigation is probably a whole different topic. So David, I think it's what interesting here is you come from this from maybe a little bit more of the sports angle with COVID and some of the other content pieces. So I'd love to hear your perspective on what you saw last year.
Yeah, actually, I think the biggest impact the pandemic had was actually on the entertainment side of our business. And really the pandemic cemented what most of us already know, that viewing and consumption patterns had changed. And really now more than ever, consumers want to access premium video in digital and OTT environments. And this was really clearly seen in the proliferation of AVOD and SVOD services that came into market. And the inventory they brought into the marketplace. And really what that signaled was it's no longer just about linear, and that now more than ever, a brand's OTT strategy is as important as their linear strategy. Fox clearly recognized that audiences were becoming more bifurcated. And as a result, we acquired Tubi, the largest and free, biggest AVOD service around. Really what AVOD and SVOD services bring is audiences that are younger and diverse, and really that cannot be reached on traditional television. And so what this allows is advertisers to reach these audiences really in limited commercial formats. And from our side, the combination of Fox and Tubi not only greatly expands our television reach, but really allows advertisers to reach these younger audiences in incremental ways that they can't really get already in their linear formats or within other Fox buys they're currently doing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So let's make a little bit of a shift from, maybe historical and obviously what we had to take away from 2020 and, have some fun and think about, all right, what's this mean for the next 2 years, right? And so I think, at a very high level, maybe Bob, I'll have you hit it in terms of, some of the things you might be seeing around maybe new discovery capability or ability to target stuff in both in a linear and digital way that's in an interesting way might reduce budgets a little bit because they could target more, but grow budgets because they can get a little bit more ROI and effect out of it, right? And then maybe Emily and David, have you go a little bit more into again, some of these trends. I think Mary hit it really interesting in terms of what's happening with China and Twitch, obviously. So Bob, why don't I have you kick that off?
Sure. I think first I'll stay in the lane of short form. I believe in spite of the debacle that Quibi went through in 2020, some of that is probably timing. Some of it was maybe wrong formatting, and certainly way too high on the production expense. I think the best days of short form are still in front of us because there's just a compression of time. And when you have a compression of time, you need to get that content. Now, I'm not suggesting that Game of Thrones is ever going to live in a short form environment, but certainly information, sports highlights, things like that in a more creative way. I mean, you could argue that TikTok is nothing other than a manifestation of a short form content play. We feel that more professionalized short form delivered to the specific audience is a huge opportunity around the world. We're seeing amazing growth in short form in Latin America, obviously in the United States. So our world is, can you get more brands that pay attention to the value of short form, whether those are premier brands like the NBA and NFL or others that really understand how important and critical it is for their young demographic to get engaged, because the reality is that we have multiple appliances. The younger you are, the closer you are to an appliance that's on the go. And that basically tells you that the short form video world is here to stay. and really only, in my opinion, in the early innings of what could be transformative. So we're staying there. And from our perspective, we believe you have to crunch costs. You have to be very disciplined about your costs, and you have to have scale. You've got to be able to produce a lot of it, and you've got to get it into as many hands as possible. So again, short form all over the world, very strong.
Yeah, great point. I think obviously you saw, Roku going, pulling up the short form content assets of and just validates, right, that these streaming devices see the value of that and now want to actually get into the ownership of it, which was very interesting because traditionally they haven't really been buying into content, like Apple TV hasn't really gone that angle. Also, if I have three teenagers, and if this is any indication, they spend more time on short form YouTube on their TV, not on their computers, not on their phones, but sitting with me on the couch and showing me some crazy, interesting short form YouTube content that we are enjoying as a family. So I don't think
Watch what they show you.
Yeah.
Actually, can I add one thing onto that, just from a kind of future view? I mean, I think what's really interesting is what the pandemic has given us is also an acceptance of a totally different level of production quality, right? We all got used to, the TV news, which used to be highly produced, now, coming from someone's living room, and it wasn't that bad, right? It was good enough that people started to accept that. And I think we start to layer on things like AI to help some of these key opinion leaders who are, I think it was like Kim Kardashian sold 100,000 bottles of perfume in 15 minutes, right? It is worth paying attention to things like that. And these key opinion leaders, if we can give them AI tools to really curate and, raise that production level of quality, to help them understand in real time, what is their audience asking for? What are they interested? What are they chatting about? And really make a shift to, real-time content that's resonating with the audience that's paying attention at that moment. I think short form really has a powerful future.
Yeah. If I can add to the point about data, I would say content became king again this year and data is queen. That data is in a very important aspect, and who gets the scale to get the data is going to have a foot up in this game and be key to this game moving on in terms of where does the money go. And it's nice to have all these different forms of content, but the question is which one is going to get the money.
Yeah. And or different market shares, right? I think they're all kind of rising, but there'll be shifts, right? So how about Emily? I know you obviously you're part of this great new wave of international content getting that viewership and taking advantage of digital distribution. Love to hear from your perspective of what you see as some really great points for the next year or two.
Sure. So like everyone else, COVID was an accelerant for us. Some of the viewership trends that we saw was that people returned to comfort viewing, right? It's been a very stressful time. People want to come to and see what's familiar, and they want to come to environments where they feel comfortable and they know what they're going to get there. So as a result, we saw a huge surge. For us, I think you spoke a little bit about this earlier, breaking down of the barriers internationally. And I think that's only going to continue. For British content, you really only used to be able to get it in two places, right? You could get it from BBC America, actually I should say three, BBC America, PBS, and then you can pirate it or use a VPN. The introduction of Downton Abbey changed a lot because it made British part of the American content media consumption diet. And since then, there have been more and more shows that have premiered on digital platforms in the US from the UK, the Great British Baking Show and The Crown, and you just have one after the next that, thanks to streaming, people have been able to consume British, and it's become much more mainstream. So it's interesting, when we started BritBox, I launched it back in 2017, we thought our audience would be Anglophiles and expats. And so we were very excited that there was this rabid audience out there of people who really wanted everything that they could eat in their British content consumption. But we soon found, because of the streaming platforms and their distribution of British, that the audience was far bigger. And as a result, we've continued to grow and benefit from that. But I really think, again, that got accelerated even further over COVID. And, you know, most recently we've had The Crown, and it's part of the everyday conversation when people talk about what are you watching. So for me, that's an important trend that I think is only going to continue over the next several years. I'm obviously very focused on the British side of it, but I think that's becoming more true of content from other countries as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And maybe David, and then maybe even Kevin, obviously, you guys are working with different, you know, parts of the content piece, right? Yeah, maybe David just talk a little bit also about, you know, you mentioned the entertainment piece, but
no, it's a great question and something we think a lot about at Fox. And one area or sector in particular that I think is beginning to innovate is live sports. In particular, I think there's a big opportunity to reimagine what the new fan experience is like. And we're starting to see some of this. You saw this past weekend. The NFL actually broadcast their first game on Nickelodeon. And it was really interesting to see how Nickelodeon not only incorporated core tenets of their business like slime in the end zone after a player scored a touchdown, but also integrated their talent and tools into you know, a very traditional broadcast. But two specific areas that I think are going to be transformative when it comes to the fan experience is one, the development of companion program that exists within live big events. So at Fox Sports, we conduct a thing called a watch list that we do in conjunction with every live broadcast or major sporting event. And live watch lists, what they are live digital broadcasts that are streamed on our owned and operated platforms and then broadcast into our social channels. And really what these give are fans the opportunity to get closer to Fox top list talent, NFL stars, and other influencers that can provide a unique and different perspective than what they're seeing in a traditional television broadcast. The other area that I'm really excited about is legalized gambling. I think as more and more states legalize gambling, what you're going to see is just the continuation of gambling, especially as it pertains to video. But I think those use cases are going to expand outside of sports into other areas like politics and news, for example. So I'm really excited what innovation can be brought to sports and look forward to seeing that happen.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, I think the innovation that we find today is really inherent in the devices that we distribute on. And, you know, without a legacy, you know, sort of terrestrial network that we're trying to support or innovate on top of, Vivo is a digitally minded, you know, television network, and we're unencumbered by points of distribution that might not have the functionality of the internet, you know, the search and the recommendation that comes along with discovering new videos. And to Bob's point, what happens in the short form video content environment is that every 4 minutes or so, in our case, you have the opportunity to recommend what is next. You know, if you think about a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or a Disney Plus environment, that's a 22 or 44 or, you know, 120-minute opportunity that happens every 4 minutes in Vivo's case. And, you know, the through thread of what a Quibi might look like or any other innovation in short form content is to try to garner long form viewership, and viewership that happens not just on an individual basis, but happens on a co-viewing basis. And the nice thing is that I think a lot of companies do look to what we do and what music video has done for 35 years is to how those things come together and to what the enhancements and the innovation of search and recommendation, which is more passively delivered, will offer that viewer and will offer that family when they're experiencing music videos from their favorite artists and their favorite genres or their favorite theme at the moment. And I think we've been the beneficiary of that for quite some time because our organic growth in the television has happened, you know, over the last 2.5, 3 years. We're getting 40% up each year, year over year, and certainly accelerated by the COVID environment. We're taking that to market. And I think what's nice for an advertising, you know, community that has had a genre of content really absent from its upfront buying mindset over the last 10 years, is that they've got another opportunity to buy into pop culture to counterbalance that aging audience in linear TV with a younger, more vibrant audience. So the 18 to 49 looks a lot like 18 to 24 and 18 to 34. And you have that alignment for brands with pop culture that sells products. So we've had a lot of fun with it. We're definitely experimenting well outside of the United States. Again, it's a global license that we carry with us, and the agencies and the advertisers are responding.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight there. So yeah, we talked a little bit about this sort of e-commerce angle. When I did my corporate development years at NBC, and this is even back in the early 2000s, we had this mantra: let's turn the viewer into the customer. We thought everyone would be pressing buttons on their TV screen and buying stuff, with interactive TV, and took a little while, but you entered this 15 years later, where you have again this broadband connection, this ability for people to view on different devices, to certainly see something and have easy access to get immediate purchase in a variety of different ways. So let's talk a little bit, maybe specifically, there's key players you see there, or any trends that again might be different versus US versus international. But let's go maybe a little bit deeper there on the next level. So Mary, I'll hand that over to you. And again, everyone else should feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that e-commerce has taken off, especially pandemic times. But I think the key points here, again, are around, Saul mentioned that, being data driven around this. And I think we're also seeing an interesting shift in terms of consumer preferences, privacy, consumers really owning their own data, and companies having to almost co-create the experiences with the customers, right? Being more respectful of, you can't just mine the consumer's data and suddenly present them an ad, that it still borders on creepy, right? And people want to understand how their data is being used. So I think that's still an important aspect of it. But I think, other trends like 5G, right, are kind of getting the content out there in new ways. And I think one thing, again, I talk about AI a lot, but it really is pervasive, how it has changed the game with everything. If we think about ad moderation as an example, right, or ad, maybe not even personalization, but ad tailoring, so that the ads are aligned with the content that's being shown. And I think there's still often a mismatch between the content that's playing and then the ad that pops up. And if it's we're getting a little bit better on the kids versus adults, content. But even it's same as you, or my kids always watching YouTube and short clips, and sometimes the ads, I'm like, that they don't really care about Grammarly, or when they're 6 years old watching a cartoon. So there's I think there's a lot of room for opportunity to do that ad moderation, and one, make sure it's appropriate, but two, make sure it's aligned, so you can start to capture those e-commerce sales and turn those viewers into customers more readily.
Yeah, no, I it's great point. I think if Emily or Bob, anyone has other input there, if not, we can jump ahead here.
Peg, I'd like to add one thing about the commerce side, because we do see a correlation between short form and commerce. One thing that I'm witnessing, at least we've seen in Latin America, is the TikTok phenomenon and what's happening as it relates to commerce. It's easier influence, especially when you have an influencer. And the other side of this equation is you're starting to see this new phenomenon called Facebook social. And as they blow out that whole social e-commerce component, you're going to start seeing more and more of those trends where the content marries the product. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Walmart is participating as part of the TikTok, whatever future TikTok may have in the US. So there's definitely a connection, a synergy, it's symbiotic, the whole idea behind relevant short form content and e-commerce opportunities.
But it's about adding that data with AI, as Mary was saying. And it's not just pilots, it's enterprise AI now. So the kinds of things we're doing with the weather company, in that you have to take the content and make it relevant to the content. You have to make it relevant to the context of where the person is at the time. And you have to make it relevant to the persona. You add that all together, you can do a lot of things, but you have to let people opt in without surprising them or scaring them. And we just did a report, the state of Salesforce, where we looked at how people react to the Salesforce platform, and increasingly, whether it's enterprise employees or customers, it's about trust. So as we think about building this capability with our consumers, and if you will, empowering them, pleasing them, as opposed to scaring them, trust becomes a key variable here that we have to deliver on.
Yeah.
I would add just that I think as an SVOD service, my perspective is I kind of look at this from a different angle, because for us, the viewer is the customer, right? And in order for them to remain with the service, we need them to continue to pay a recurring fee. And so what that does, though, is we have access to a treasure trove of data about what that user does on the platform, their status as a subscriber, and we then use that data to retain them and to ensure the continued transaction for our service. But we're using that data to make business decisions about product features, about content acquisition, content scheduling, as well as marketing channels to use. But then we're also using that data to determine how we talk to our customers and how we communicate with them in social, in email, even in customer service. And so for us, it's a little bit different, because in order for them to be a viewer, they have to be a customer. And we use the data to ensure that we retain them for as long as possible.
And that leads actually right into our next question is, how we see content evolving in this direct consumer world. I think we all saw, and maybe we're a little shocked, but it's not, given the quality of the content, the Disney Plus launch, right? And how every parent had to get that immediately for their 6-year-olds, right? It wasn't an option. So I think when we maybe can talk a little bit about how maybe more some of the traditional studio-like content players having to shift into this new world, some of them launching their own services direct, and to your point, playing the data into how that then curates it to a whole new level. What do we think about that world? Do we think it'll continue to be, obviously successful from the studio making that transition? Obviously, the theater viewership has been very much affected. And I think someone had mentioned here how you're seeing joint launch on theater and HBO at the same time, or different services. So again, I'll open up. I think Kevin or Bob, you guys had some thoughts here, but anyone else who wants to chime in?
Yeah, I think just with broader services, in the end, the consumer wins, right? So the choice and the opportunity that is available to consumers today far exceeds that of pre-strategy or pre-pandemic or any of the other distribution channels that were available before. It doesn't necessarily that the consumer wins on price. There is a stacking effect that will happen on all of these subscription services. But one thing I will say is that, when you're presenting a body of content or a library of content to a consumer, they're going to self-select into the things that are most relevant to them. And that will be the narrowing of the choices that they make themselves. And that's where you give them control, and that's where they win. And hopefully that there is some level of efficiency and honestly, consumer satisfaction that results in that. There's big areas of content like music videos, for instance, that are still watched narrowly in genres, narrowly by artists, narrowly by age range. And when you have those big libraries that you're presenting to people, you just have to find that user at that time, whether it be through the profile that they enter through, or maybe it's the time of day, or maybe it's the day of the week, or maybe it's their geography where you're targeting someone. And that's the importance of local content, which someone mentioned already, marrying with general audience content, or sort of global content, if you will. So we watch all of those things. We do use YouTube as a big barometer for that.
Mm-hmm.
They are the most ubiquitously distributed video network that's out there, and they provide a lot of analytics for us that we can program against in a lot of these other more self-selected or personalized experiences. So it is a hybrid approach to what people choose and then what people are presented with.
If I may add, I think the phenomenon of what Disney accomplished last year with Disney Plus, but their integration, if you look at Disney pre-COVID, you'd say, wow, an integrated operation. COVID hits, everything is in tatters. Plus comes out, the stock almost increases by 50% over the 3 or 4 ensuing months. And what's happened is Disney has this brand appeal that literally crosses almost every border in the world. It has almost no limit to how they can price it. In fact, I saw a recent published study that shows where the ceiling is on Netflix and where the ceiling is on Disney in terms of subscription. And it's night and day. They're not even on the same planet. In other words, people are prepared to spend a lot more money to keep their Disney Plus up to $20, by the way, and look where it's priced relative to Netflix, which has a tougher ceiling moving forward. So when you have a brand as ubiquitous as Disney, you've got literally a global marketplace to play in, and you've got a library that is I don't know how many thousands of hours they have available, and an integration with production. I think that the days that Disney has ahead of it with its streaming business is nothing but green, meaning green in money, because they've hit it really, really well. It's going to be a lot more challenging for others, including HBO, to compete. Ironically, HBO created this genre, if you will, I think, and they pretty much gave it up. First to obviously Disney generally as a competitor, but I don't see how all of them can compete, and I just can't imagine anybody can take Disney at this game.
But the consumers only got so much money. And part of the problem is going to be how many of these channels can they afford from how many different places? And is there going to be a rebundling? One of the things we talked about last year, I think, is the need for reintegration and rebundling. We're going in the other direction at the moment. And the question is, will the consumer continue to buy all these things separately?
Yeah. And with the long tail of content, for example, with Disney and some of the acquisitions they've made, right? And they've got, not just the traditional Disney that you think of, but they've got, an even broader library behind that. And I think that is some of the sort of internal bundling that we're seeing as well, that will change the game too.
Yeah, I remember back at like this 2003, my NBC days, where at a very high level senior executive meeting, and the big question was, will people go beyond $30 a month to pay for cable viewership? And now I don't know, you're probably looking at close to probably 100.
Remember when theme park tickets were $18? So.
Yeah. So that price elasticity, I think Bob hit it really. For good quality content. Limited access to get it unless you pay for a subscription, right? Disney pulled a lot of their stuff from Netflix, etc. That whole strategy is something that's going to be either further more refined, right? It does, and maybe Emily or Kevin, you guys could speak to this a bit, but I think also that great question of big brand, acknowledgement allows them to get a little bit more aggressive in these spaces. And so for newer brands coming in, how do you get above the noise? Obviously there's distribution, there's marketing, picking, how you target your type of viewer demographic, being smart. But how do you think new brands actually can grab a piece of that, awareness? It's hard. Yeah.
No, I think it's a good point. And I think just to piggyback on what Robert was saying about Disney, I think of all of the studios that are calling back content and launching their own direct consumer services, Disney was probably the only studios that had a brand that had meaning to the consumer. Otherwise, you don't know if the movie you're going to see in the theater, if you can remember the, Sting up front, was it Universal? Was it Fox? I don't know. So I think it's first and foremost interesting that as these studios have clawed back content, launched their own direct consumers, are people going to know where to go? Do people know where to go to find Big Bang Theory? It's on HBO Max, not CBS All Access. So I think all of these services that are targeting mainstream, they need to actually also redefine who they are and make sure customers know what content is on their service. Interestingly, I think that the smaller, focused, targeted services like BritBox, we don't have that problem, right? I am not going after every American. I'm going after a very specific demographic, and I have a very focused proposition. So I know how to find those people. And when I find them, I know how to talk to them, I know what to serve them, and I know how to keep them. So I actually think we have an easier job of going out and getting our customers. Now, obviously, we're not going to reach 100 million households with BritBox, but we are able to define ourselves in the market, carve out a niche, and be able to say, this is our audience, we know how to reach them. Whereas Peacock and HBO Max and Discovery Plus, like, they are all out there fighting for the 100 million households.
Yeah. And so thanks, everyone. I think we're coming up on a time here. If maybe we'll jump into just, the last question I always like to ask, and, not everyone needs to chime in, but if you have something top of mind, interesting product or company you've seen, in the last year or so that you guys would maybe, call out. One, I've just ran across on this very topic of creating awareness is a company called Glider. Still early days, but their whole thesis is, hey, there's a lot of duplication in content across subscriptions. What's the best package? What should you be to? What kind of content do you want to watch? And try and be a little bit more of that, comparison shopping of TV viewership in an interesting way, right? And get some money off of that guidance. So I'll open it up for anyone else who wants to chime in.
Sure. Following on the Disney theme, Michael Eisner is launching something called Strum, which is kind of interesting, which is taking the class pass model that many of us have seen developed in the gym and other retail spaces, and now use that for content. So is there a place for an aggregator who helps you find the content, samples that to you, and then sells you a subscription?
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Not related to video, but I'm in love with my Whoop, which is a interactive wearable service that tells me everything I'm doing wrong and that I need to do better, from sleeping to being more active. But it really digs deep into things like sleep, your activity, and how you can live a more healthy lifestyle. It even could potentially predict if you're having COVID or not. So I think technologies like these will only continue, and I can't recommend the Whoop more.
Great.
It stresses me out, David.
Oh man, it is a job within a job.
Yeah, I'll focus on measurement. I think one of the unsolvable problems when we were distributing music videos, sort of ubiquitously across a lot of walled gardens, was to try to get some form of measurement in place and understand the audiences that are there. And we found a company called T-Vision that has ACR data that has been able to do that for us and just provide a lot of different insights. And, in certain cases, we really translated it into a currency. But in general, it's nice to know that there is a technology that exists out there that doesn't have to be integrated with a platform in order to function.
I've got one. We talked about data a lot and who owns it. There's a startup from Tim Berners-Lee out of MIT. It came out of an MIT project called Solid. And it's a platform where consumers own their own data. It's trying to shift the model around data ownership.
Great. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone. I think that concludes our session. Really appreciate the great insights here, and hopefully looking forward to seeing you in person next year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.